All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis, and your host, Eric Kavanagh, is here. And folks, I am super psyched to be talking to a couple of experts in the hardware industry. They also know about software and data and all kinds of technology. And we're going to talk about a survey, but I've got two experts from Rackspace. Yes, indeed, Rackspace. They've been a powerhouse in the industry for decades, a very serious player, and they know a lot about what's going on in this world. Of course, a lot of AI conversations these days, but hybrid. We're going to talk about hybrid and what that actually means. We're going to talk with these experts and find out. And there was a survey that's been done. So, IT leaders increasing investment in multi and hybrid cloud strategies to future proof their operations. That's what the survey reveals. So, let's go ahead and dive right in. Shwetank, Sheel, tell us what did you find in this survey? What surprised you? What didn't surprise you? What do you think is interesting?
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. What I found quite interesting, especially in the from a context of analytics and BI perspective here, is that the proportion of data that's gone to the cloud has really skyrocketed. If you look in this survey, it's showing that more than 50% of the data is actually now sitting in the public cloud. It is
Right.
across many different cloud providers. It's across hybrid providers, and we're expecting to see 7% more going up there. And the other interesting thing that I saw is that the adoption of SaaS has really skyrocketed. And what that really means is that now more so than ever, we have data sitting obviously across different clouds and silos, but also within these different SaaS applications that are running on their own or customers' clouds, which means bringing that data together, whether it's for the purposes of analytics or for the purposes of AI, has become an increasingly challenging requirement.
Yeah, and we've also got Ben Blanquera on the call here. Ben, I'll throw this over to you. I remember I've been covering this stuff for a long time. So DM Radio turns 17 years old next month. So I've been doing this a
Mhm.
while. And I thought the cloud would take off 20 years ago, and it really took off like 10 years ago. So it was, for some
Mhm.
reason, it just took a while. I credit actually Satya Nadella of Microsoft for pivoting his whole enterprise to cloud. And I really think that woke up a lot of people who are like, geez, I guess we better get on this. But I remember that in our conversations on these shows, we went from talking hybrid cloud to multi cloud in about 1 week because people figured out it's not just going to be on prem in one cloud, it's on prem in multiple clouds, which
Mhm.
greatly increases the complexity, right?
Oh, absolutely. In our survey, what really came out was the notion that it's turning into a much more complex world, and that it much like when you're preparing a meal for your family,
Uh,
if you just buy one thing all the time, that's not going to satisfy things, right?
that's funny.
And so when you think about IT organizations providing services to their businesses, businesses have different flavors of things that need to be done. And those
Right.
different flavors of things need to be done, you have multiple options now. And so those options in terms of things to be done are, we call those workloads. And so when we think about workloads, we have to think about what is a workload and where should it be.
Hmm.
Much like, do you need something fast for your family, or do you need a big sit down meal? There are different scenarios, and each of those different scenarios says there's different options. And what's happened is cloud, everyone got, hyperclouds are wonderful. However, one size does not fit all.
Right.
If you're looking at workloads that have to be secure, workloads that that don't need bursting and things like that, well, perhaps you just need to put them on private cloud, right? If you need native services that are in hyperscale, put them in the hyperscale. The point is, all this is saying is that for IT organizations to provide the great services to their businesses in terms of capabilities, you have to give options.
Hmm.
And hybrid is a way to think about it. It's not one. It is both public and private, and you've
Yeah.
got to you've got to be able to do both, or else you're not optimizing the services you're providing to your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I'll throw another question over at you, and then we'll get Tank back in this. But
Yeah.
observability, I think, is a huge play in what we're seeing right now, and FinOps, which of course is
Oh my
related to
gosh.
observability. Because like 5, 6 years ago, it was hard to tell what this stuff really cost. Now we have very granular reporting on what the cost is, and that allows you as an IT organization to do what you just suggested, which is optimize. We're going to do this workload in this cloud. We're going to do that workload on prem. And when you have the capacity to do that, if you've embraced cloud nativity, right? If you're
Hmm.
cloud native, even in your on-prem environment, if you've done something to make it look more cloud native, you can really move those workloads around, and that gives tremendous agility to the organization, right?
Absolutely, and that's a key driver. As technology leaders are looking for how do I future proof? You know anything about that, Eric? As you think
Hmm.
about future proofing, you have to think about how do I create the most flexibility with things that I don't even know are going to be coming. We
Right,
don't know what AI workloads are going to look like, right?
right.
We don't know. We don't know where data is going to be moved. We don't know, right? So the question is, how do you then create a way of creating a platform for your company
Hmm.
that you're not locked in,
Right.
right? That you're not locked in, and you create the most flexibility. Because as most folks know or have said, AI is going to change everything. The
Hmm.
footprint of how business is done is going to change pretty significantly,
Right.
right? And so how so it is incumbent on technology leaders to, I have to drive flexibility. And by the way, I've got to make sure I do that in a way that I can not spend everything in the bank, which has to do with the FinOps, which has to do with observability. We think that if you're a major corporation spending several $1 million, you're probably there's probably 20 to 40% of utilization that you could optimize, right?
Right.
But it's like, have you ever read a bill for your cloud? It's like the phone bill times a million, right? You have it,
Right.
but unless you can actually understand it,
Right.
you don't know what buttons to change. And so, like we at Rackspace, we are, I think we are the largest FinOps service provider in the world,
No
right?
kidding. Wow.
Heck,
That's a great
heck,
way to look at it. That's a very interesting perspective. Because
yeah,
this is old school, but what
yeah.
gets measured gets managed. I'll throw that over to Shwetank, right? What gets measured gets managed. And when you can start to see where all these costs are coming from and align them with the projects and understand what is the TCO, understand what is the ROI, are we getting return on this investment? The more you can do that, the better you can manage your environment, the more efficient you become, the more money your enterprise makes on the bottom line, right?
Absolutely. And I think, Eric, what we're seeing now is that, this entire idea about ROI, which in a sense has been driven by the explosion of AI, because now everybody wants to do AI and wants to
Right.
understand what's the benefit of that. But that is, trickling down all the way to the bottom of the stack, which is the entire cloud stack, right? Because, when we talk about data pipelines, or we talk about storage, or we talk about compute associated with doing transformation, it's very important to understand the unit economics of that. It's not just how much does my data warehouse cost to run, or how much am I spending on GPUs. It is what is the unit economics, the price performance that I want to
Right.
optimize for my inventory optimization, because I'll spend 200,000, but it only makes sense if I'm actually saving more than 200,000 from the business benefit that's coming from that particular ML model. And one of the other things that sort of listed out in the study is that there's this rise of centralization, or COEs, right? Because
Hmm.
the way we think about it is that there are a large number of what I'd refer to as non-functional requirements, where you need to have observability, you need to have quality, you need to have a standardized way of figuring out, as Ben was saying, what kind of workload works best in what component in the cloud, right? Now,
Hmm.
while they give you a lot of flexibility, they also end up actually giving you hundreds of options to do the same kind of thing on different components. And having guidance around, I'm trying to build an inventory model, I'm trying to build a chatbot, I'm trying to build a BI report, means I need to have these standards regardless of what actual data is going in there, is something that is becoming quite key to analytics, but also all workloads in the cloud.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's fascinating. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, and I was just sort of going to jump in here, and what we're seeing, like, and this is what the survey said is, there's a sort of phase of going through technologies, phase zero, day zero, day one, day two. Day zero is strategy, day one is sort of like transformation, day two is the run side, right? And the challenge is when you start thinking about hybrid cloud, the talent required to go through all those phases and run things at scale, right? And run things at scale that are secure and run things that are reliable. There's a big talent gap, which came out in the survey as well. And so I think we're going to start seeing more models that have to do with managed services on the run side because of and there's going to be my crystal ball says companies are going to want to align with folks who can provide the managed service for the full stack side of things so that they can concentrate on what makes my beer taste better. Right.
That's funny.
Right. You got to worry about things, and your team members have to worry about things that make what is the thing that makes my beer taste better versus the things I need to run. And so I think there's going to be emerging models regarding the ecosystem of operations.
Right.
That's going to be really important.
Well, and you mentioned this already, and I'll throw this to you first, Ben. AI workloads. There are all kinds of AI workloads.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of folks in the business world are starting to appreciate that models, deep learning modules can take any number of shapes. You can have any number of inference layers. You can ingest all these different component parts. You can stack and layer and design that as you wish. And there's really no limit to the permutations for how you do those things. And
Oh,
what I
absolutely.
see happening, I think that's very interesting, is companies are building out bespoke models for individual clients. I mean, just one random
Yeah.
company I'll throw out there. I interviewed SafeBooks AI,
Mm-hmm.
and what they do is they take a model off a Hugging Face, and then they
Mm-hmm.
train your data, your
Mm-hmm.
accounting data, your financial data on your model that is your
Mm-hmm.
bespoke model. And then once it gets to a certain level of proficiency, it just watches all your finances and says, "Hey, I think I found a problem here." Because there is a story of Macy's where some person hid huge amounts of expenses. They didn't find out
Mm-hmm.
about it until they went through their quarterly earnings, and it was like, "Whoa,
Mm-hmm.
no!" Like red three alarm fire. That stuff won't go away. My point is that this is a fantastic use case for AI. It's not just Gen AI. There's a lot of excitement around Gen AI. That is one whole category of very interesting technologies. But AI models have been around for decades, and
Forever.
and
Forever. This
and
is
some of
not
them
new.
are extremely efficient at understanding particular business use cases, right, Ben?
Oh, they absolutely are. And as you said, Eric, you know, if you look at models, it's the essence of these models is you have trained a model based on a data set,
Right.
right? Right. And you can make that data set really big, which is general chat GPT massive, or you can focus on your specific data set, right?
Right.
And so I think I like you bringing this out for folks to understand, right? What is the thing you're trying to do,
Right.
right?
That's right. That's
Because
right.
based on what you're trying to do generates a whole lot of options. The challenge is most folks just go to, hey, I just do chat GPT, right? And sort of all the different nuances associated, how do you optimize, get lost really fast.
Right.
And so unless you're actually talking to someone who understands the nuances, but also understands, think about this, Eric, the model, if you look at the value chain of like from data to model to the decision, that model is just a little bit, it's like 5% of the tech stack
Wow.
related to delivering value,
Right.
right? And
Right.
everyone's getting really excited about that. But guess what, folks? That other 90% underneath the waterline, if that ain't correct,
Right.
it
That's
doesn't
right.
matter.
That's
It
right.
doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
so that's a really that's what when we think about hybrid cloud and what came out in the survey, you got to worry about that stuff.
Right. Well,
And
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Shwetank.
I just want to make point that that's a very good example of what we mean by workload aware. Because if you think about it, the training of a model or fine-tuning of a model, etc., this requires a large amount of data, a large amount of compute, but for short periods of time. You may do it daily, weekly, whatever is the cadence required for that particular workload, which
Mm-hmm.
definitely, for which things like public clouds tend to be much better. But the
Mm-hmm.
actual usage of that model or the inference of that model is a much more predictable compute activity where the
Mm-hmm.
cost of inference becomes much more important. And
Right.
kinds of things tend to be much better in a private cloud or self-hosted kind of environment. So even within a particular use case, thinking about different stages, what's the right place for that to go, whether it's public cloud, one or more public clouds, or it's private cloud, actually becomes quite important. And that's, I think, something that is captured in this as well.
Yeah, and that is important. And I've said this for years now, and I feel somewhat vindicated. I'll throw it over to Ben first. My mantra was that the rumors of on-prem's demise have been greatly exaggerated. What do you think?
Oh my God. Oh, oh my God. That is a think of that like it is an urban myth.
Yeah,
It is an
that's
it
right.
is it is like the biggest urban myth that has been perpetuated on us.
Right,
Think about
right,
right. This is um because depending on the workload you need, you know, I mean, like if I'm driving my kids to school every day, right? My Honda Civic will work just fine,
right,
right? Or my Honda Odyssey because I had a bunch of kids, right? I don't need my sports car,
right,
right? And so, you know, when you start looking at as Shwetank said, the economics of this, it starts looking like, maybe that truck is a much better value. And that's really the key word
right.
is a much better value for what I'm doing. So, and the survey will show the amount of folks think about repatriation,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's kind of
That's
like
right.
buying a boat. You get really excited the day you buy your boat, then you realize how much it actually costs,
Yeah.
right? And you're like,
The upkeep.
the upkeep, right? And you're like, all right, the best days of a boat owner is when you buy the boat and when you sell the boat, right?
That's pretty funny, especially if a hurricane's coming in, right? Then you're like, oh
Exactly.
no, oh
Well,
no, this is a problem. I can't get
which
insurance, you
exactly,
know?
which yeah, which goes back to Eric, like, what are you trying to do? What is the workload that
Right,
matters for you, and be clear about the options.
right,
Because you know what? You don't want to overspend
right,
because with AI, like, a lot of times, like I talk to a lot of CIOs, I go, hey, I want to do this AI thing, but I don't have, my budget didn't go up,
right.
right?
That's
And
right,
customers aren't paying anymore. So
right,
who's going to pay for this, right? So that's where when you start looking at the delivery costs and unit economics, innovation costs money.
right.
I've got to figure out how to optimize my current environment, which means I actually need to, I've got to do spring cleaning. I've got to do my workload aware so I can pay for this stuff,
Right.
right?
Well, I mean, you bring up an excellent point, and we'll dive into this in the next segment, folks, because spring cleaning, right? Just understanding what you have, where it is, who's doing what, where is your data, how much is it costing you to store this stuff, what is the overall plan? It's very difficult to know that from a large enterprise perspective. It's very hard to sort of piece together all the components to really understand what you're looking at. But that is a huge issue right now that companies need to do, especially as this AI
Oh,
era dawns. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to a couple experts from Rackspace. They have a big IT survey that just came out. Very interesting information. Not a whole lot of big surprises for me when I look at the market and understand what's happening here. And let's face it, the shiny new object now is AI, and everybody wants it. They want to leverage it, but you got to be careful. Number one, how much does it cost? Well, really, number one is what do you want to do with it? Like, what is the business case around it? Number two is what it costs, and then you can kind of figure all that out. And FinOps is a huge part of that. And Ben, I love how you said Rackspace is the biggest FinOps provider because that's part of what you're doing is helping people understand what does this stuff cost. And once you define your business objectives, then
mhm,
you really got to focus on what's it going to cost us, how are we going to do it, where's all that going to come from. That's
mhm.
where Rackspace really comes into play, right?
Absolutely. What so we manage over billion and a half dollars of cloud spend with our customers.
Wow.
Within that context of that, what we then do is provide a service to those customers that is a FinOps service that essentially once a month we go over your bill, right? Whether it's Google, Azure, AWS, we go over your bill, right? And we say, hey, this is happening. What's going on here? What about this? You might want to turn this off. Might want to move things here because it's like uh, depending on the configuration, it is really easy to buy resources on the cloud. it,
Too easy, right? That's the problem. It's too easy.
it is so easy, right?
It's
And
like your kid buying Squishmallows with your credit card. Not that I know
exactly,
anything about that.
they're just pressing the button, right?
Right, that's right.
They're
More
just
Squishmallows.
and it's no fault of anyone's other than, you had said, we had talked earlier about this notion of observability. If you don't see
Right.
it, it's just there. And all of a sudden your bank account's like draining like a swamp, right? And you're going, what's going on? Well, that's where FinOps and FinOps is continuing to grow. Just the notion of measure what you're using
Right.
and have it at a granular enough level. And then, by the way, work with folks who understand what that 1,000-page phone bill looks like,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because it is not simple.
No. Well, and these days, I'm just guessing here, so maybe you can shoot me down if I'm wrong about this, Ben, but these days, one of the really cool aspects of these large language models is you can feed them big, bulky documents and then just ask all kind of questions from it. I'm guessing you could load your document, if you're willing to
I,
do that, into a ChatGPT and say, what the hell's going on here? Like, where am I
I
spending money?
I'm guessing there's probably a startup in the world that's doing that. There's someone figuring that. The challenge is you can feed it in, right? But remember, AI systems is a living, breathing thing,
Right.
right? It is learning every day. There's more data. And so
Right.
what a lot of folks don't understand is, guess what? This is a one-shot deal. Once you put it in, you got to run this thing,
Right.
right? And you have to do a feedback loop. You have to train it.
Right.
You have to tune it. Like it doesn't. It's not one and done. And so once again, so when we think about the run side of this thing, you know, organizations are thinking about what is my operating model,
Right.
right? What does it mean to run? What do I need to measure? How do I tune it? How do I make sure it's not doing bad things? How do I
Right.
make sure my users know how to use prompt,
Right.
right?
Yeah. There are all these component
All
parts
these
that come
things.
into it, and it is a lot to absorb, right? And I'm sure it's very easy to kind of get distracted and go down a wormhole, and you always got to pull back. All right, what are we doing? What are we trying to do? I remember one of my favorite managers ever was a guy when I was at the Data Warehousing Institute, and I'll throw this over to you, Shwetank. He Peter Quinn was his name. He's the best manager I ever had. I didn't even know what a good manager was until I had him, and I was like, "Whoa." Like my first meeting with him up in Seattle when I moved up there, we get to the end of my first meeting, and he says, "No, is there anything I could do for you?" And I was like, did a VP just walk in? Is there like, oh, you're talking to me? I was like, what? Oh, okay. But anyway, he would say something that I loved. He said, "Let's achieve what we're trying to achieve." Right? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
bit it's a bit simple in a way, but the point is it focuses you on accomplishing something and not getting distracted. And I think that's really important to Ben's point, right? With these AI implementations to know what you're trying to do and to monitor it and to manage it and to be open to the fact that maybe you're off target, right?
Absolutely. And this is why, if you think about FinOps, there's one aspect of it about what's already live. And, I think there's not enough work that was done originally when we put many of the things into the cloud to
Yeah,
actually monitor and define that. But when we're
right.
talking about sort of doing new things like defining new AI projects, one of the first things becomes being able to define what is this answer worth, right? So if I can get this answer, classic example, we want to put an HR chatbot out to our users to be able to look at how much leave they've got left, right? How much is that answer worth? Is it worth 2 clicks and $3? Is it worth, 5 clicks and
Mhm.
10 cents? That becomes an important part of it because, one of the reasons why a lot of, organizations get stuck at the POC level is because you can optimize for getting that chatbot to give you an answer really fast. But if that's driving the cost from 10 cents to 50 cents, maybe that's not the right thing because that's not what you're trying to do. What you're
Wow.
trying to do is, optimize at the sort of overall and global level, which is why it becomes very important to both have that definition upfront and then have the observability tooling, the FinOps practices to monitor it on an ongoing basis, right? Because that's not a once and done thing either. You're constantly monitoring, ML model. I like to take the example of ML models because that's a
Mhm.
more pervasive. We've got optimization models, got next best offer models, etc. Just like with those models, you're constantly monitoring, what's the actual metric achievement of this.
Sure.
Able to do
Right.
Mhm.
21%. Same way is the cost of running this actually lining up with that because the whole foundational premise of the cloud was that your costs would
Right.
scale
That's
with your
right.
business.
That's
And
right.
to do that, you actually have to measure it.
Right, and know what you're measuring. Is it customer
Hmm.
satisfaction? Is it uplift
Hmm.
on sales for a particular product? And Ben, I'll throw this over to you. All this really comes down to being able to manage the data around these services, know what it's actually costing you. That's the FinOps side. Know what it's actually getting for you. That's the
Hmm.
business management side. Just being able to align the numbers. Like revenue went up.
Yeah.
Okay, that was our objective to get revenue up, but the costs are up too. So, oh no, that's kind of a problem. You have to be able to adjust all those things. And these days, you can't do that every quarter, right? You got to
Hmm.
do that like on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, right, Ben?
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. The speed of sort of fine tuning based on what's happening, the feedback loop
Right,
is especially for retailers, right? It's daily.
right,
It's daily. I mean, it's and so I mean that's what, and I think the airlines have got this figured out with dynamic ticket pricing, right?
right.
And sort of like,
And
but
concerts.
oh my gosh, and what I and like
Wow.
I'm seeing restaurants trying dynamic pricing with online, like it's just crazy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, but
It's weird.
it does say there's a world around optimizing optimizing yield, right?
Right.
Whether it's on the revenue side or on the cost side, it's all about optimization, and data is the key
Yeah.
to that optimization.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And I'll throw it back over to Shwetank. You've mentioned a couple aspects from my life, which is data, data warehousing, analytics, understanding the data, and really, it's amazing how far we've come in the last, I'd say, even 5 years. And there are companies like Snowflake and Databricks that had a lot to do with this, really
Hmm.
optimizing the stack, the technology stack, to be able to deliver analytics. And now I mean, it's table stakes. You've got to be able to run analytics on your
Hmm.
data to know how much money you're making, what's the margin, where is it coming from. All that stuff is table stakes now, right, Shwetank?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's table stakes. And let me throw this out there, right? One of the biggest impact of Gen AI on data and analytics has been that Gen AI has driven people to feel that they can to have democratization of all of what we
Hmm.
technology, right? So,
Yeah.
writing Python code has also become commoditized because I can go use a large language model to help me write that. And
Yeah,
the
right.
result of that is, as you get table stakes on from a platform perspective, which definitely the likes of Snowflake, Databricks, and all the three hyperscalers with their technology have done, what you've now ended up with is a lot more business users directly transforming data, trying their hat at building reports, trying their hat at building Snowflake tables, or writing Databricks code because they can and because they feel empowered because of what's happened with Gen AI. And that has sort of, one of the things is in the report is this, that I think more than somewhere around 60% of companies actually have data sitting in more than one cloud because different teams have gone and built out different analytical silos at different places. So what's happening is sort of, how do I actually bring that together? How do I unify that data and say, while the sales team might be saying our marketing lead gen conversion is X% and the marketing team is saying Y%, how do I actually
Hmm.
get to sort of the truth? That is becoming sort of more of a problem. And that's where I think on the technology and cloud side, this
Hmm.
concept of a CCOE has evolved, a lot. Whereas on the data side, the concept of, having an operating model for data and analytics and ensuring that we can give many different business teams support is something that is now starting coming into, the forefront because the technology has, as you said, actually become quite commoditized in that sense.
Well, and it's also getting baked into a lot of places. I mean, 15 years ago, you would have an analyst who would review and slice and dice data in a data warehouse and then write some report manually and go tell people about it. And then they would, hopefully change something they're doing in the business. These days, a lot of that is inline analytics, right? It's being delivered
Hmm.
through, whether it's the ERP or some web system or whatever it is. You have that data baked in. And that's where you want it, I think, is in the operational systems where people are on the front lines doing things. You want that AI and that analytic input to make suggestions, to point things out, say, hey, and I think, and maybe I'll throw this over to both of you first for talk. I think much of the benefit of AI will come in the form of suggestion, in the form of, hey, we noticed this is happening. Maybe you should do something about it, and then the user will say yes or no. What do you think, Shwetank?
I'd agree with that, Eric. And what I'd add is I think the biggest disruption is actually on the consumption layer, or the what I would refer to as the BI layer, because we build reports based on the different kinds of questions that we expect people are trying to answer. And then you have a visual report page which has a chart, a metric, etc., and you go look for the answer that you're expecting. Whereas this has now become a lot more conversational. Conversations triggered from the AI agent side saying that this looks like an anomaly. Is this correct? Or from your side saying, I see, what was the sale for this store last week, because I'm going to have a conversation with the store manager of that. And then sort of very incrementally, the same way as we would have talked to the analyst to figure out what's happening,
Right.
able to talk to here. And what that means is that the focus really becomes on having trust, right? You talk about observability of the data platform becomes really important, because I need to be sure, I need to be confident as a business user that these numbers are correct, they're current, they're complete, they are honest and vetted. The actual UI of the report, etc., doesn't matter as much, because that's become an older. Why would I go do 3 steps when I can just
Yeah.
voice ask that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. I'll throw it over to Ben. The fact that natural language processing is now darn near proficient is a really big deal, because executives can sit there and ask all sorts of questions of these information systems in natural language. You don't have to learn
Hmm.
SQL. You can just ask a question and get an answer back. Now,
Hmm.
to Shwetank's point, you want to make sure there's trust. You want to make sure that
Hmm.
it is very grounded in reality and not
Hmm.
hallucinating. But still, they're getting pretty good at that, and the guardrails are getting pretty strong. What do you think, Ben?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and executives are getting trained that you can work in a conversational way, right? The expectations level because of consumer products regarding, hey, I can just talk to my phone, I can just talk to Alexa. We're already getting trained behaviorally to expect that, right?
Right.
And so, absolutely. The key, though, and when you start talking about a business setting, the foundational about what's being teed up to you has to be really good,
Right.
right? And the other thing, what we're seeing is, and we had a customer, a Finnish sort of customer in sort of the payment kind of world, talk about the key now is creating the customer experience around that data, right? Is it being teed up in line as they're making a decision? Is it a report? Because the more we can make these things as part of your workflow,
Right.
right, the
Right.
more valuable it's going to be. And so we're seeing a rise of sort of like AI customer experience design. So it's seamless.
Interesting.
So it becomes just seamless to the user, right? It's not
Right.
like I'm using AI. It's like I'm just asking Siri. I'm asking,
Right.
I'm Eric
That's
asking Eric, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and analytics in general, it's my experience that when someone gets a taste of that, they want more. I
They
mean,
want
that's just
more.
how it happens. When you can start to ask questions and understand the underpinnings, you ask the next question and the next question, and it takes off. And we'll dive into this in the next segment here in just a second, folks. But we're talking to a couple experts from Rackspace. Their big survey that just came out about IT leaders increasing investment in multi and hybrid cloud strategies to do what? To future-proof their operations, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to a couple experts from Rackspace. We've got Shwetank, Sheel and Ben Blanquera from Rackspace, and we're talking all about the survey. And maybe Shwetank, I'll throw this one over at you first. One of the things that just jumped out at me from the survey results was 40% of respondents cited a lack of skilled cloud professionals as being a constraint. I mean, 40%, 2 out of 5 are saying we can't find the people. And you can train yourself these days. That's the beautiful thing about the cloud. You go on
Hmm.
Coursera and take classes, all night long. Many of them are free to understand. And it's important to know the difference between this cloud and that cloud, the different services they offer, the cost structures. I mean, all these details, the devil's in the details, right,
Hmm.
Shwetank?
Yes, and I think that's where some of this gap comes from, because as Ben was saying earlier, if you think about this as your cloud bill as a phone bill, it's because it's not that, for example, Databricks is one line item. Databricks actually has 15, 20 different ways in which they will charge you depending on what you're trying to do. Same with and even fundamentally, and I think the cloud providers have are serial offenders in complexity of services. If you use Spark on AWS, there'll be like 8 different ways in which you can do that. So in the on-prem world, you would have said, okay, I'm going to use Spark. Now let me just find someone who's really good at Spark. And now you need to figure out, okay, for this particular streaming workload, which is, giving me 10,000 messages per minute, is it
Right.
going to be better to run it on EMR or Databricks Spark or Glue Spark? And what are the costs associated with network, with compute, with storage that come into that? So, I think experience there counts for a lot because every project tells you what you should not have done and makes
Mhm.
you learn better
That's
for
a
the next
quote.
one. Yeah, but I think that is one of the key key differences in how
Mhm.
quickly you can get started, right? And that's what we find that Ben was talking about FinOps, but I'll refer to the fact that from an architecture perspective, because we in Rackspace focus in on doing a lot of this work purely in the clouds. We have developed sort of this framework to determine, okay, you're trying to do these 7 things. So this is the architecture, and it's going to have these different cost models, which plugs into, from a FinOps perspective, does this total up to the value that you're going to get, and how are you going to monitor and measure that?
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
Ben, I'll throw this over to you. I'm just guessing here based upon your experience and the data that you see and all the engineers and the sort of frontline workers at Rackspace, you can offer some real good advice on those kinds of questions that Shwetank was talking about. Should you run this in Azure? Should you run that
Mhm.
in AWS? Because having experience in those environments will help you understand not just the cost, but the workflow, the process, what are the weaknesses, where does it run into trouble? All those kinds of details are really important, and it's always best to learn from someone else instead of learning the hard way, right, Ben?
Well, that you've hit the nail on the head, Eric. We've been in the hosting and infrastructure business for 25 years. There's a lot of gray and lost hair in running operations for thousands of companies.
Yeah,
And it's like that learning curve. There's that 10,000 hour rule. Like once you do something for 10,000 hours, you kind of know
right,
what the things are, right?
right, right.
If if companies are just entering this world, how many hours do your team have? We got 20. Okay.
Yeah, right.
You have to then realize there's a learning curve and it can cost you a lot of money.
Yeah,
And so partnering with folks who understand, because it experienced in multiple environments, right?
right.
Anyone can be successful when it's a good day,
That's a quote too. Anyone can be
right?
successful
It's
when it's a
successful
good
when
day.
it's a good day, right? It's when stuff hits the fan, that's when things shine,
Right,
right? And we've been through a lot of stuff hitting the fan because our customers, stuff happens,
right,
right? That's where
right,
you learn, not on a good day. On a
right.
crappy day is when you learn.
Oh man, that's brutal. It's painful to think about. Shwetank, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to, what Ben was saying, that, we all live in an environment of scarcity, which means that whatever team members actually our customers have, it doesn't make sense for them to be learning these or relearning, what a lot of us already know because we've done this. We want their time to be focused on, which is the right model for this kind of use case, or what is the use case that you want to drive. That is what's driving the business outcomes, and what we want to focus our customers' time is on that, so that we can apply the learnings that we already have, where you don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything, which is what I refer to as below the line in this case.
Right. Yeah, reinventing wheels is expensive. I mean, you can always build a better mousetrap, but you really have to watch out. It's the blocking and tackling when you get right down to it, right, Ben? I mean, the blocking and tackling can take you down. If your offensive line is not strong, your quarterback's going to get sacked. I mean, there are lots of things. It's not a glorious job, but the cloud architect is kind of like that either offensive line or defensive would be security, right? So the cloud architects are the offensive line pushing forward, allowing you to run into the end zone, right, Ben?
Oh, you said it. At the end of the day, like winning is about execution.
Right,
Execution is about day-to-day things, right? It is about the little things that add up to the big things.
right,
And so, since I am an Ohio State fan and I just saw them winning the national championship, right? It is the blocking and tackling and consistency on a day-to-day basis. And
right,
that and so when you think about that, that's where you start thinking about how do I have playbooks? How do I automate things? How do I have observability? How do I make sure as Shwetank said, I focus my people on looking at the right things, not all the things, right?
Right.
That's
That's
really hard in a world of lots of widgets I can look at.
You know what? That's a really, really good point. And Shwetank, I'll throw it over to you, and we'll probably go into the podcast bonus segment with this thread as well. No, everything is changing, and so what you have your people focus on. Think about old IT versus new IT, and understanding old IT is still around. You still have these data centers. You still have to
Mm,
manage Linux implementations and all these different things, upgrades, patches, all that stuff. That's still going on. But now you have this multi-cloud environment where you have all these other things to worry about, and it depends on the company, depends on the use case, on the size of the organization, et cetera, on your actual team. But that's a big challenge, right? Is knowing how to get everyone focused on what they should be focused on, especially when it changes over time. What's your advice there, Shwetank?
Absolutely, Eric. And this is why you see one of the findings of the survey is sort of this rise of centralization. And I'm not talking about centralization from IT doing everything, but IT defining these COEs, which are saying these are the basic standards that you need to follow. Because the other thing that's happened is that there has been a lot of democratization of people actually building their own AI apps,
mhm,
AI reports, or playing with their data sets. So as you give that responsibility out, you need to, with great responsibility comes sorry, with a lot of rights come a lot of responsibility. So what we're seeing is that there are these COEs which are being set up to set up standards so that people can do themselves, but are doing that, and it's not, one IT engineer or one cloud architect is not going to be able to look at, the security aspect and the FinOps aspect, as well as sort of the data aspect and how you go from a cloud native perspective. And that's really where the rise of the COE and the rise of sort of managed service providers, where you bring that specialization from a managed perspective, has really come into play.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. That's why you're going to see more of these managed services, right? Because when
mhm,
someone really understands a particular environment, you want them focused on that environment. You want them sharing the information with their
mhm,
colleagues. I mean, this whole knowledge sharing side of the equation is not insignificant, and it's like people
mhm.
don't want to sit there and read big long manuals about stuff. So it's like you have to populate it in your center of excellence and have someone shepherding that and watching over it, right, Ben?
Well, absolutely. If everyone's creating their own sauce because they don't have standards,
Right,
then they're not worried about blocking and tackling. They're just learning, right? And
right.
so, history has said you have to start with basics, give people a playbook, which is the COE kind of things, and says do these 10 things right first before you get to the fancy stuff, like learn how to block.
Right.
Like put your arms up in a certain way, like get down there, like learn how to tackle. If you don't know those basics, this other fancy stuff that you're gonna get excited by, it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, and I'm gonna use this line to lead off our final segment today. But we had a fantastic event a couple weeks ago with Decodable and Red Panda, and we had a
Mhm,
lady from Old Mutual, a bank builder, and she had
mhm,
this awesome mantra. She said, "You need to earn your right to do things, to build things. So first, as Ben suggested, learn to block. Okay, now you can block. Learn to tackle. Okay, now you can tackle. Now let's talk about some strategy. You start with the basics, you build up from there, and you earn your right to be able to do the cool stuff by showing that you've blocked, you've tackled, you've done
mhm,
your it's like a kid having done his or her chores, right? Okay, you did your chores. Now we can go to the game together. Now we can do some fun things in the enterprise. You have to really earn your right to get there, to use the powerful tools because they are expensive. And they can do great things, but you got to pay for it. Someone's got to pay the piper at the end of the month, and there's a lot of bills to be paid. But folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back with the podcast bonus segment here on Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis with Shwetank Sheel and Ben Blanquera of Rackspace. We've talked all about AI, analytics, data. Well, guess what? It's got to be secure. Like the security side, man. I went to the Splunk conference last year and just looking at some of those screens, what these people do all day, I'm like, wow. It takes a special kind of personality to sit there and like just go into the deep dark forest
mhm.
and look for the moles and the foxes and all the other troublemakers that are going to cause you some issues here. And guess what? AI helps with all this, right? If you get a good model, that's what really fascinates me are these bespoke models that companies are building. You can just grab something off a Hugging Face and just deploy it in your environment, start playing around with it. For security, it's good stuff because these models can be very good at identifying anomalies, and anomaly detection is probably like the number one most important thing in security. What do you think, Ben?
Oh, absolutely. Um, we're in our survey, we've got more than half folks saying we're using AI to improve our threat detection, which is all about anomalies and where things are happening. When you look at how many endpoints the endpoints where bad folks who do come in, it's
Right.
millions, right? And so what's happening in all those endpoints, all those kind of things is incredibly important. And AI can play a big part in it. AI can also play a big part in sort of monitoring your internal systems to make sure everything's are up to the right patch level. Everything is secure. You've got things closed off that should be closed off.
Right.
You're looking at internal user behavior regarding like who should be getting permission. All the things AI can do for hygiene internally, as well as then AI for threat detection. And so
Right.
it is yeah, because guess what? The bad guys are using AI.
They are. I mean, it's crazy. The phishing scams are getting really good. They're
Oh,
they're
they're
getting
getting
really good
so good.
on the design. I mean, I know to look for them now, but it's like, oh, a Verizon bill is $1,000. Is it? No, it isn't. Like that's a phishing scam. You got to watch out for that stuff. But Shwetank, I'll throw it over to you. Ben made a great point. Turn things off. If things aren't being used, if access points are out there and they're not being used, just knowing what's not being used and turning it off, that's probably half the battle right there. What do you think?
Correct. And I think AI is helping beyond what Ben said. There's two other things AI is helping with. One is actually, being able to go over the large amount of metadata that we have to understand who is using what is actually,
Mhm.
normal and what isn't normal.
Right.
Um, and but then the other side of that also is that it is also another additional surface area that we do need to secure, because you
Mhm.
talk about LLMs, they come with their own kind of security that we look at, and how you
Right.
prevent prompt injection, how do you actually ensure that the data that you're training on is not skewed, how do you
Mhm.
ensure that it's not exposed externally. So I think this is one of those things where you have to do it, but it is going to continue getting more and more complex as we start to become more dependent on everything that is digital, right? Because I mean, just think about it. The proportion of things that we were doing digitally 5 years ago versus now, even if you take the cloud out of it, just think of your driving licenses are now digital, your tickets are now digital. So the surface area of both the data as well as the interactions have skyrocketed. And I think the security side of that is trying very hard to keep up, but it's a nuclear arms race.
Yeah, that's right. And Ben, I'll throw it
Mhm.
back over to you. It is a constantly changing battlefield out there, and you have to stay on top of things, and you have to be very agile and willing
Mhm.
to admit when you're wrong about stuff. I think, probably pride leads to as many security breaches as anything else. What do you think?
Oh my gosh. Oh, absolutely. Like no one wants to say I left the door open, right? No one said no one ever. And
That's
so
funny.
and so yeah, I do think like the rate by which people learn which implies that I'm gonna be open with what's working and what hasn't worked, is going to be a key determinant to how secure things are, because you've got to have closed feedback loops associated with what happened, how do we fix it, or
Right,
what's working and how do we do
right,
more of that, right? It's
right,
all about learning.
right.
Absolutely.
Well, and we'll just kind of close on this because I think it's very exciting. I'll throw it over to Shubtank and then Ben for final thoughts. It's very exciting to know that we can use these AI engines, whether it's old-fashioned predictive models, for example, or all this Gen AI stuff. The Gen AI is great for just sort of stochastic use cases for just exploring ideas and looking for things. Yes, you have to verify it because they do hallucinate, but still you need people. I mean, I personally,
Hmm.
I advocate for an information strategy group in every organization, like almost like a center of excellence around analytics or just strategic thinking, because things
Hmm.
change so much. I mean, look at these like ChatGPT, they're adding in new layers, they're doing new things all the time, and of course, it's a black box now, right? It's not open AI, it's closed AI.
Hmm.
But just having a team focused on how to use these technologies, I think, is a huge, huge win for companies to do. What do you think?
Absolutely. And it's also because as you put things into production, you have to continuously review how those should be affected or
Right.
updated with that, right? And I'll give you an example of, we internally in Rackspace actually built a Gen AI tool around a year ago. It was as iSearch, the information coworker for enterprise that we use in Rackspace. And a year ago when we built it, a lot of these abstractions around how you do guardrails, how you do cost monitoring did not exist. So we wrote that ourselves. And now
Wow.
when you look, 12 to 15 months later, a lot of these abstractions exist. What we need to put in now is other kinds of guardrails around sort of learning of different kinds of data and things like that. So we have to constantly go back and look at, what should I rip out? What should I use new? Because I want to get the benefits of the continuously lowering price of inference and of the better
Right.
models which are doing that. So it is a continuously ongoing thing, and having this sort of operating model which defines a center of excellence which is tasked with doing that and then cascading that out or guiding everybody is really a key critical thing.
Yeah, great point. And 1 minute left. Closing thoughts from you, Ben. What's your advice on companies who know they have to do something and are just not sure where to start? What's your advice?
Real key, couple key things. One, look at your workloads now and optimize the workload so you can free up some money to pay for these things. Uh,
Right.
two, as you're looking at AI, it is an emerging field, but you have to have an operating model about how you're going to run it. It is not one and done. It is you have just now created a new set of employees. And just like a new set of employees, you have to do care and feeding and life cycle. So
Right.
that's what I would suggest.
Excellent advice. We'll look up this survey, folks. New research by Rackspace Technology reveals hybrid cloud and AI integration are key drivers for IT innovation in 2025. Look them up online. Great talking to you, gentlemen. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.